Let us travel back in time to 1974. It was an era when cinema was truly bold, unafraid to push all boundaries, and at the center of that brilliance was Mel Brooks. Do you remember the first time you watched Blazing Saddles? Perhaps it was in an old movie theater or through a worn-out VHS tape passed around the house. You laughed until you were breathless at the sharp jokes that no studio today would dare to greenlight. However, hidden behind those hearty laughs, this classic satire conceals a behind-the-scenes story that is even crazier than the script. Would you believe that some of the most legendary moments were born from silly accidents? Or the fact that the entire cast was almost fired at the last minute? Today, pour yourself a warm cup of coffee. We will sit back not just to reminisce, but to uncover 15 secrets and incidents that turned Blazing Saddles into an immortal legend. Let us begin our discovery. E. Audiences rode horses to the theater on premiere day. Even the premiere of Blazing Saddles carried the exact same fun spirit as the film. Instead of hosting a luxurious event in the familiar Hollywood style, the film crew decided to turn the release day into a real Western festival. The premiere was held at a famous drive-in theater in California. But what amazed everyone was the invitation for the guests. Instead of driving to the theater as usual, many guests were encouraged to show up on horseback. Imagine that scene. Movie stars, journalists, and special guests rode horses into the premiere area as if they had just stepped out of a classic cowboy film. It was an image both humorous and distinctly American. This event helped create a special atmosphere before the film was released. And when audiences finally got to see Blazing Saddles, they quickly realized that this was not just a comedy. It was a mischievous tribute to a glorious era of Western cinema. R. The soundtrack singer did not know this was a comedy. Right from the first minutes of Blazing Saddles, audiences were welcomed with a song full of classic Western spirit. The epic melody, emotional lyrics, and powerful voice made many think they were about to enter a serious cowboy movie. And that was exactly what Mel Brooks wanted. To achieve this effect, he invited Frankie Laine, one of the most famous voices associated with Hollywood Western films. The interesting thing is that Brooks did not reveal this was a satirical comedy. He wanted Laine to perform the song with all his sincerity and emotion as if this were a true epic. The result was perfect. Frankie Laine created an opening track that was both majestic and nostalgic. That absolute seriousness actually made the humorous jokes that appeared right after many times funnier. That was one of the smartest jokes Mel Brooks ever pulled off. Sen. The lead actor almost lost his life on the first day of filming. It is hard to believe that one of the most beloved characters of Blazing Saddles almost never appeared on screen. When filming began, the role of the Waco Kid originally belonged to actor Gig Young, an Oscar-winning star who was highly respected by Hollywood at the time. But right on the first day of shooting, everything turned into a nightmare. Gig Young, who had struggled with alcoholism for years, suddenly suffered severe alcohol withdrawal syndrome right on set. Witnesses recounted that he vomited violently and his health condition completely panicked the entire film crew. Filming was immediately halted as he was rushed to the emergency room. Facing the risk of the project falling behind schedule, Mel Brooks had to make an extremely quick decision. He immediately called Gene Wilder and asked the actor to catch the earliest flight to save the film. Looking back today, many believe that reluctant change created a miracle, because Gene Wilder later delivered one of the most memorable performances in American comedy history. Sit. Legend John Wayne declined because the film was too dirty. When talking about American cowboy films, perhaps no name is more iconic than John Wayne. For decades, he was the face of the strong, righteous, and charismatic Western hero. Therefore, when Mel Brooks finished the script for Blazing Saddles, he boldly sent it to John Wayne, hoping the legend would join the film. Interestingly, Wayne really liked what he read. According to many behind-the-scenes stories passed down over the years, he laughed out loud reading the script and clearly understood the intelligence hidden behind the bold satire of Mel Brooks. However, after all, he still decided to decline the invitation. The reason was not because he hated the film, but because the content was too mischievous and too different from the image audiences had grown accustomed to from him over the years. Nevertheless, John Wayne still had a special respect for the project. He reportedly told Mel Brooks that he would be one of the first people to buy a ticket to see the film. It was a very polite refusal, but also the clearest compliment possible. Woo. The bargain to create the blockbuster Young Frankenstein. Sometimes a decision made in an emergency changes cinematic history. When Gig Young had to leave the project suddenly, Mel Brooks immediately contacted Gene Wilder to save the role of the Waco Kid. But Wilder did not answer simply with a yes. According to many famous Hollywood anecdotes, Gene Wilder made a rather unexpected condition. He would join Blazing Saddles, but Mel Brooks had to promise to direct another project he was cherishing. Brooks agreed immediately. At that time, probably no one expected that seemingly simple agreement would lead to the birth of Young Frankenstein. The film later became one of the most beloved comedies of all time. Interestingly, both Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein were released in the same year, 1974. Two completely different films in style, but both became classics. And it all started from a rushed phone call on a weekend when a film crew was facing a crisis. Leo, the Native American chief, spoke Yiddish. One of the most subtle jokes in Blazing Saddles appeared very quickly on screen, so much so that many first-time viewers might completely miss it. In a flashback scene, the Native American chief character appeared and talked to his tribe. This role was played by Mel Brooks himself. But the special thing lay in the language he used. Instead of an indigenous language, Brooks spoke Yiddish, the traditional language of many Jewish communities of Eastern European descent. This was not a random choice. Brooks wanted to create a satire aimed at older Hollywood, when studios often gave indigenous roles to actors with no indigenous roots. By having a Jewish director play a chief and speak Yiddish, Brooks turned the entire scene into a multi-layered joke. That is the kind of smart humor that makes viewers both laugh and realize the paradoxes that once existed in American cinematic history. C. Sued by Silver Screen star Hedy Lamarr. Among the many bizarre behind-the-scenes stories surrounding Blazing Saddles, perhaps few expected that the film once caused one of the most famous stars of the Hollywood Golden Age to file a lawsuit. That person was Hedy Lamarr, the legendary actress considered one of the beauty icons of 1930s and 1940s cinema. The root of the issue started from the villain of the film named Hedley Lamarr. Even though the spelling was different, the name still made many immediately think of Hedy Lamarr. Upon learning of this, the actress argued that the use of a similar name affected her privacy and personal image. Normally, such a lawsuit could lead to prolonged disputes. But Mel Brooks handled it in his own unique way. Being a longtime fan of Hedy Lamarr, he did not want to turn the incident into a tense confrontation. The two sides eventually reached an out-of-court settlement in a fairly amicable atmosphere. Interestingly, instead of avoiding this incident, Brooks cleverly turned it into a joke right in the film. That is the kind of smart and bold humor that helped Blazing Saddles become an irreplaceable Hollywood legend. By Doc R. The director threw the censorship requests straight into the trash. If there is one moment that best shows the rebellious personality of Mel Brooks, this is probably the story. After completing the first cut of Blazing Saddles, the film was screened for Warner Brothers executives. Everyone in the room understood they were watching a very unusual work. But instead of laughing out loud like the audience later did, many executives looked worried. A list of editing requests was quickly brought up. According to many sources, there were 26 scenes suggested to be cut. From dialogue deemed too bold to controversial comedic situations, almost every element that made the film different was on that list. Mel Brooks listened very politely. He nodded, took careful notes, and appeared completely agreeable. But as soon as the meeting ended and the executives left the room, Brooks was said to have looked at the paper for a moment and then thrown it straight into the trash can. Thanks to that brave decision, Blazing Saddles was released almost intact. And those very scenes, once considered too much, became classic moments that fans still talk about more than 50 years later. 0. Richard Pryor.co wrote the script but was banned from playing the lead role. One of the most interesting things about Blazing Saddles is that the person who contributed greatly to creating the film almost did not appear on screen. That was Richard Pryor, a comedy legend whose bold performance style changed the entire American entertainment industry in the 1970s. From the very beginning, Pryor not only participated in writing the script, but was also considered by Mel Brooks as the perfect choice for the role of Sheriff Bart. With his sharpness, intelligence, and genius improvisational skills, many in the crew believed he could turn this character into a cinematic icon. However, Hollywood at that time had very different concerns. Warner Brothers executives were worried about the controversial image of Pryor, as well as personal issues related to drugs in the past. Ultimately, the studio decided not to approve him for the role due to production insurance risks. The role of Bart was then given to Cleavon Little. And the miracle is that this reluctant decision brought about an excellent performance. Still, many fans cannot help but curiously wonder how Blazing Saddles would have turned out if Richard Pryor had actually stood in front of the camera in the lead role he helped create. Sure, the first theatrical film in history to feature a fart sound. Today, toilet humor jokes are quite common in comedies. But in 1974, Hollywood still considered it almost a taboo. Because of that, the scene of cowboys sitting around a fire eating baked beans in Blazing Saddles became a historical moment. After a few minutes of talking, unexpected sounds began echoing across the screen. That was the first time a major Hollywood film brought flatulent sounds to the big screen so openly and clearly. The funny thing is that the actors themselves could not keep a straight face. According to many behind-the-scenes stories, this scene had to be shot many times because the whole crew kept bursting into laughter. Every time a new sound effect was added, the set fell into chaos. Looking back today, the scene seems quite harmless. But at the time of release, it broke a long-standing barrier of American cinema and became one of the most talked-about moments of the film. Shi. The final fight scene breaks the fourth wall wildly. Audiences walked into Blazing Saddles thinking they were watching a cowboy film. But towards the end, Mel Brooks decided to completely destroy every familiar rule of cinema. Instead of ending with a traditional shootout or confrontation, the final brawl unexpectedly broke out of the Western setting. The characters crashed through studio walls, ran into other sound stages, and turned the entire Warner Brothers studio into a part of the story. Suddenly, audiences no longer saw a Western town. They saw the real Hollywood. The actors, backstage crew, and even other sets were swept into that hilarious chaos. To the audience of 1974, this was almost non-existent. The film not only told a story, but also openly reminded everyone that they were watching a movie. That boldness helped this scene be considered one of the most famous fourth-wall-breaking moments in American cinematic history. Sha'ar. President Barack Obama used fake ID to go see the movie. One of the most famous fans of Blazing Saddles is actually Barack Obama. Many decades after the film was released, during a ceremony honoring Mel Brooks at the Kennedy Center, Obama shared a memory that made the whole auditorium burst into laughter. He recounted that he watched Blazing Saddles when he was only about 13 years old. This immediately made Mel Brooks curious, because the film was rated R and theoretically not for young audiences to watch alone. When Brooks asked how he could get into the theater, Obama smiled and gave a very humorous answer. Perhaps he used a fake ID. That moment not only created laughter, but also showed the long-lasting influence of the film. From ordinary audiences to a future president of the United States, many Americans grew up with the dialogue and bold jokes of Blazing Saddles. That is a sign of a work that has gone far beyond the framework of an ordinary comedy. Chassin. The apprehension about racially sensitive dialogue. Although Blazing Saddles is a comedy, not every laugh came easily. During filming, actor Burton Gilliam experienced extremely stressful moments when he had to read racially derogatory lines in front of his co-star Cleavon Little. Gilliam understood well that the film was satirizing racism, not promoting it. However, having to directly utter those words still made him feel uncomfortable and guilty. He worried that he might accidentally hurt his colleague standing opposite him. Realizing that, Cleavon Little proactively pulled him aside to talk privately. Instead of being upset, Little used humor to dispel the tense atmosphere. He reminded him that it was all just acting, and joked that if those words were Gilliam's real thoughts, things would have been different. It is behind-the-scenes moments like these that show the mutual trust and respect that help the film handle sensitive topics in a smart and deeply humane way. Chassin. The original title of the film referred to Malcolm X. Before the world knew the name Blazing Saddles, the film actually had a completely different name. In the early drafts, the writers called the project Tex-X. It sounds simple, but this name contained a rather bold layer of satirical meaning. It was a combination of the American West image with the name of Malcolm X, one of the most influential figures of the American civil rights movement. That idea reflected the very premise of the film. A black man unexpectedly becomes the sheriff in a prejudiced Western town. Right from the title, the authors wanted to signal that this was not a traditional cowboy movie. In the end, the name Tex-X was not kept. However, it shows the rebellious and bold spirit that existed from the early days of the project. Just considering such a title in the early 1970s is enough to show that Blazing Saddles was born to break all the familiar stereotypes of Hollywood. Sure. Richard Pryor insisted on only writing dialogue for the character Mongo. When mentioning Richard Pryor's contributions to Blazing Saddles, many people often think of sharp dialogue or bold ideas in the script. But the interesting thing is that his favorite character was not Bart or the Waco Kid. According to many behind-the-scenes stories, Pryor was particularly interested in Mongo, the giant with a scary appearance but surprisingly innocent soul. This character was played by Alex Karras. Pryor is said to have written or edited many of Mongo's lines himself. He wanted the character to not merely be a laughingstock giant, but also to have lovable and sometimes very deep traits. Because of that, many of Mongo's sayings sound both naive and make the audience laugh because of their authenticity. Looking back today, Mongo remains one of the most beloved supporting characters of the film. And behind that appeal is a huge mark from the unique imagination and innate comedic talent of Richard Pryor. Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly magical that after half a century, Blazing Saddles still maintains its appeal. These behind-the-scenes secrets do not diminish the magic of cinema, but on the contrary, they make the masterpiece of Mel Brooks even more authentic. Sometimes, it is the silly accidents that forge an immortal legacy. Now, I would love to hear from you. Among the stories above, what surprised you the most? Which movie scene always makes you burst into laughter when you remember it? Please share in the comments section below.